We've got 7 million registered personal taxpayers. We've got almost 20 million grant recipients. You cannot work with that ratio of taxpayers to grant recipients. Julius agrees with me. He agrees that he stands for the leader controlling the party and the party controlling the state and the state controlling society. He agrees that that's his philosophy, but he doesn't agree on what the result will be. I believe that the minute I see the ANC setting up a commission of inquiry, I know they're trying to get people off the hook.
And your relationship with the Patriotic Alliance? They're quite a friendly bunch.
They don't see coalitions as coalitions. They see it as extortion mechanisms. So the DA is giving us this. Then we go to the ANC and we say, the DA has given us 1 Mako position. If you give us 2, we'll come over to you. The ANC says, we'll give you 2. Then they come to us. If you give us 3, we'll come over to you.
King David Studio podcast.
I don't do long intros because I imagine the story will tell itself. Because that's some that do this.
That's the point.
Yeah, that's the whole point. I hope you're well, ma'am. I hope you've been well. It's, I think, happy birthday, or belated happy birthday, which is in order, isn't it?
Yes, my birthday was last Saturday, actually.
Last Saturday, yes. No, a few days ago.
A few days ago.
How did you still celebrate birthdays in a big way?
Well, I don't, but fortunately my family does. And I went to the Young Leaders Program of the Democratic Alliance in the morning.
And that's how you celebrated your birthday?
That's how I celebrated my birthday, with my DA family and then with my biological family. So it was lovely. I had the grandchildren and we went to the Spur.
Okay.
Because they love the Spur. So we were at the Spur and they had their faces painted and they played in the play area. And my husband and I had a good rest.
How old are your grandkids now?
6 and 4.
Oh, so still young kids.
Very little ones.
So there's a lot of energy.
A lot of energy. That's why we go to the Spur.
Can you keep up with their energy?
Well, of course I can. I have to. I've been keeping up my whole life, so I keep up with them.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I'm still in good health.
Yes. Members of your organization who are immediately been helping us this morning say you have more energy than they do. And you're not young. You are in your early 70s.
Yes, I'm in my early 70s. I just turned 73. But I've been blessed with a lot of energy. I don't think my mother would call it a blessing. I never slept. I was always on the go, and she was completely exhausted with me as a baby. But I've always been blessed with a lot of energy.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that a 73-year-old, I remember when I was doing research, I didn't know she was that old. You're not young at all.
No, I'm not young at all. But, I've been around a while. I was counting. In 3 years' time, I will have been involved in politics in one way or another for 60 years.
What?
Yeah, 60 years. It's much longer than I've been married. And yeah.
You've been married to politics that long?
In 2027, it'll be 60 years.
That is crazy. What keeps you going, though? What keeps your interest going?
My belief in South Africa. I really believe South Africa can work. But I've learned from the study of history and political systems that the only way it can work is in a modern constitutional democracy with a growing economy. And I know how economies grow in democracies. So that's why I put all my effort and time into making sure South Africa does work.
Yeah. They call you Gog.
Gogs.
Gogs.
Gogs or Gogo.
So Gogo.
Yeah, Gogo or Gogs for short.
And
yes.
you cool with this?
I'm totally cool with it. I love that name, Gogs. Yeah.
Because when you walked in, the first thing you said, call me Helen. It's like, but I wasn't raised that way. I'm sure you're familiar with our background, that no one is Helen if they're older than you.
Well, it's the same as my background. German background's very similar. You never call an older person by their first name. So I do understand the culture, but I've grown up in a South African environment, which is often, not always, but often quite relaxed about these sorts of things. But I know in most African traditions, it's not relaxed about that. You won't call an older person by their first name. And that's why people call me Gogo or Gogs.
At least
because it's a kind of nice compromise.
Yeah.
It's a friendly, casual term, but it isn't a first name.
And it's like uncle.
Yeah,
it's like uncle so-and-so.
It describes the relationship, right? I'm old enough to be their Gogo, so I'm Gogs.
You were born in 1951. Your parents arrived in South Africa in 1948.
My parents arrived in South Africa in different times. My father came much earlier. My father came in 1934.
Okay.
And my mother came in 1948. That's right.
And give me the circumstances of their arrival to South Africa.
Well, my parents were both refugees from Germany. And my mother first went to England, where she trained as a nurse. But my father came straight to South Africa. He had no education at all. So he built himself up here from the bottom, from the grassroots. He got a degree in economics from UNISA, actually.
Wow.
And he built his own business. So he had absolutely nothing when he came. Nothing.
He came in as a young man.
As a young man,
Yeah.
yes. He was first employed at the Modderfontein Dynamite Factory, digging trenches. He was digging trenches. But then when the war broke out, they couldn't keep him because he was German, obviously.
Yeah.
So they said, no, we can't have Germans in a sensitive installation. So then he went and delivered bread for a bakery. I think it might have been Atlas or Dunes or something like that. And he delivered bread for the bakery for a very long time, and then got his degree.
Jeez.
And then started his own business.
Were they older when you were born, or were they still relatively
Yes.
young?
No, they were older when I was born. My
Yeah.
mother was, older relatively speaking. My mother was 32 when I was born. And my father was nearly 40 when I was born.
Yeah.
So he'd started his business. It was just at the beginning stages then, and he was really battling. So I did grow up quite poor, in fact, very. And when we look back at the pictures, we see our house had walls of corrugated iron.
Yeah.
And garden furniture in the lounge and stuff like that. So, it was,
Which neighborhood? Because you're Joburg through and through.
Yes, well, I was born in Hillbrow.
Okay. Very different. Hilbrow.
Yeah, a very different Hillbrow. It was the Princess Nursing Home at the time. That's where I was born. And my dad when my dad was fighting with the South African Army, or was with the South African Army in North Africa during the war, he used to send his money back to Johannesburg, where his mother was elderly and living alone. And his mother never spent any of the money that her sons sent her.
Wow.
She saved it up for them.
That's amazing.
And she baked bread and sold it and did all sorts of things to keep alive so she wouldn't have to use their money. And they came back and they had a nice little nest egg. And then my father bought, deep in the countryside at that stage, a little place, a little plot really with like a corrugated iron shack on it almost in Rivonia.
Jeez.
And that's where we grew up.
Jeez, you're telling us about... So you was right in there, because Rivonia was farmland for the longest time.
It was the farmland, yeah.
And that's even when Nelson Mandela was arrested, he was
that
caught
was
up...
around the corner from where we lived. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
That's incredible. When he was David Kekana or somebody, the name that he was using at the time. Wow. So clearly your dad's and parents' level of ambition, did that rub off on you? Because clearly your dad was a mover. He wasn't just staying in one place.
Well, there you just had to look after yourself. You had to make a plan. No one else was going to look after you. Believe me, there were no social grants, no nothing. And if you were going to have children and be responsible for raising them and educating them, you had to make a plan.
Yeah.
So my dad started a business. It took a long time to build up, but by the time we were in high school, it was fine.
What was he selling?
He built up metal sales.
Okay.
In South Africa. So if you see the big logo Metal Sales, my father was one of the founders of that with some other people.
Incredible. Still around.
Yes.
Did he eventually sell it?
And my other uncle, his brother, did flexible tubing. They all started businesses, right?
Yeah.
They all started businesses and they built them up from nothing.
That is quite incredible. Yeah, I guess it speaks to that, because when I read up on you, something that comes across quite a bit is your Jewish background. It speaks of that. It says that your lineage makes you, socially conscious and stuff like that. Tell me what brings up that part of you that says something has to be done. We can't just sit and do nothing.
Well, my parents raised us very conscious because they'd been very discriminated against in Germany. Most of my father's family was killed in the Holocaust. Wow. They were murdered in the concentration camps. And I've spent quite a lot of time actually trying to trace them and track them and find out what happened to them, and the stories are terrible. But my father managed to survive, and his brother survived too, and they both came to South Africa and brought their mother just in time. They brought their mother out, and she was a widow. And they were very conscious of the extreme discrimination they'd faced. And were very opposed to it here, and my mother even more so. So my father's mother was Jewish, and my mother's father was Jewish. So it was a combination, right?
Yeah.
A mix and match. And so we've always grown up with an appreciation of all faiths and what they bring to human society.
Yeah.
And my parents raised us with that consciousness, but they also raised us with a very strong consciousness of discrimination, and were very, very opposed to it. So my mother, at the very beginning, joined the Black Sash. My father was in the Torch Commando many years ago. So they raised us with that kind of sense, and that's why I became involved in politics in 1967.
Jeez, it's a young
Probably
girl.
before your grandmother was born.
It's a young lady.
Yeah,
eh?
I was still at school. Yeah.
Wow. Geez, that's quite interesting that you were immediately, born into a political environment yourself.
Yes.
Take me to the Black Sash for a moment. It was Black Consciousness movement, isn't it?
No, Black Sash was the women's movement that protested against the manipulation of the Constitution by the National Party. Mm-hmm. And it was a group of mainly white women, actually, who wore black sashes for mourning on the death of the Constitution. It was when they wanted to take people of color off the voters' roll, and they had to pack the Senate, the National Party. And they packed the Senate, which we saw as the death of the Constitution. And I was still a young girl at that stage, but my mother was very active and got us very conscientized.
Did you get involved at any stage with the Black Sash?
Yes, I did. I was on the Black Sash myself. I used to edit their magazine. I did quite a lot of things.
Yeah.
I was very involved with them at a later stage.
What then drives you to journalism as a career?
That's an interesting question. My father read a lot, educated himself. I mean, he never had a formal education except his degree through correspondence that he took at UNISA. But every day on the way, we lived far out in Rivonia, which was still very much farmland at that stage. Yeah. Not entirely, but quite a lot.
I like how you say far out. It's literally a 15 minutes drive now.
But when we were going to school in town, my father used to buy the Rand Daily Mail on the way to work.
Yeah.
And he'd be driving and he would say to me, just read the newspaper quickly and summarize the day's events, what's happening in the world.
What?
So I used to read the newspaper and I used to say, there's this and there's that, and they're going off the gold standard, or they're this or they're that. And I would read it and tell him what was happening. And I really got hooked by the news.
Yeah.
Every day I'd look forward to getting the newspaper, and I'd love to see what happened next in an ongoing story. And I was particularly attracted to the political stories because my father was interested in that. And he'd say, what happened? And there was a meeting last night at that place. What was said there? And so I got to read the newspapers. And then in the end I said, I'd like to do that job. I'd like to write.
Yeah. Do you know, your story is so similar to someone I've interviewed before also speaks of that it was not me. I didn't create this. I was forced to read it for somebody, and that I ended up doing it.
Yeah. Well, I used to love reading it because my father used to say, read the article and summarize it for me, right?
Yes.
That gave me a huge training. It's an incredible training to read a complex article and to summarize it in 3 or 4 paragraphs for someone so they get the gist.
Yeah.
And across the board, it could be human interest stories, it could be political stories, it could be economic analysis, it could be an editorial, it could be anything. And my father would say, read it and tell me what it says.
Jeez.
It was really, really good training.
Are you at this stage of your life thinking a career in journalism is an option? Or what pushes you in that direction? Well,
I first did my degree in languages, and then I started doing my postgraduate diploma in education. It wasn't called that then, but it had another name. Anyway, I started doing that, but I thought, no, I'm actually more attracted to journalism.
Yeah.
So I applied, and I got accepted for the training program at the South African Associated Newspapers.
Wow. And you stayed?
I stayed for quite a while, but I never lost my interest in politics. I covered politics. I was lucky enough to be able to cover politics.
Did you enjoy your career as a journalist?
I loved it. It was challenging. It pushed me. And I had a very good editor, Alistair Sparks. He pushed me and put me on a lot of the very big stories. Yeah. So I liked that.
Alistair hung around the journalistic world for a long, long time. I know this because I think at some point I interviewed him when I was on Radio Metro. We called him for interviews. We used to call him a lot to get to understand a few things in the media space in particular. Yeah, quite interesting. Yeah. And you, every time we read about you, we find the Steve Biko story. Tell us exactly your role in that.
Well, I first got to hear about Steve Biko when I was a student. And as students, we joined NUSAS, the National Union of South African Students. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, there was the breakaway of the Black Students Organization and Steve Biko challenging the non-racial concept that we had developed. Mm-hmm. So Steve Biko became very prominent in his challenging of the non-racial movement. The ANC he challenged, the NUSAS he challenged, and he came with a different philosophy. He basically said Black people have to achieve psychological liberation on their own, and that would be a step towards a non-racial society. That was the broad philosophy. I can't go into it now. It's much more complex and nuanced than that. But and he became very prominent. I never met him, actually. I never met him personally. But I was a young journalist covering various things, and Steve Biko was detained. And then a week later, he had died.
And this was widely covered?
Yes, it was September 1977.
Yeah.
Very widely covered. And he died in detention about a week later. And the Minister of Justice, Jimmy Kruger, at the time, said that he had died after going on a hunger strike, but implying very strongly that he died because he wasn't eating. Now, Steve Biko was a big man, and there's no way that a man of that size would have died after a week of not eating. You can go for a very long time without eating.
That's true.
Maybe after a week of no water you might die, but not after a week of no eating. And so we knew it was a lie, but we had to kind of find out. And my editor was Alistair Sparks, and he said, we've got to crack this because it's a lie. He did not die of starvation. So we followed absolutely every lead, and eventually Dr. Jonathan Gluckman, who was the pathologist for Steve Biko's family, said he would be prepared to talk to us about what he found.
Jeez, okay.
But on the strictest condition of anonymity, because it was a time of very great risk. So Alistair went to speak to him, actually, and got the records, the medical records. And then we had to work out a proper cover for Dr. Gluckman. So what we did was I went down to interview the doctors that had seen Steve Biko in Port Elizabeth. It was Dr. Lang, Dr. Tucker, and Dr. Hirsch. Those three doctors I remember very clearly. And Dr. Lang and Dr. Tucker were district surgeons, and then Dr. Hirsch was a private neurosurgeon. And it was Dr. Hirsch who said to me confidentially, said, this is a terrible story. It is not what the government is saying it is. And it is very serious. And from that, we were able then to say that Steve Biko did not die of a hunger strike.
Did you feel it was a big risk to even publish that?
Yes, it was. I mean, I had to move out of my flat after that. I used to live in Yeovil. And I had to move out of my flat after that because I got so many death threats. And I was taken to the press council and found guilty, actually, because I refused to reveal the source. And then, it was a different kind of time.
Absolutely.
It was a
I'm
completely
listening
different
to it.
kind
It
of time.
sounds,
Had to move out of my flat. I was taken to the press council. They nearly banned the Rand Daily Mail. We had to publish an apology, which was complete nonsense.
which you did.
Well, we were forced to. So they said, you have to publish this apology. Now, we knew what we'd said was right. But when a quasi-judicial body tells you to do something, then you have to do it, knowing that over time you will prove them to be wrong and you were right.
What was the content of the apology, to say what we reported was wrong?
No. We said, we appeared before the press council. This is what the judge ruled. We therefore comply with the ruling. That's all we said.
Okay. You didn't say what we did was wrong.
We didn't say what we did was wrong. No.
And they accepted that, obviously.
Well, we said we just quoted, he said it was tendentious journalism or something like that. I remember the
Okay.
word tendentious came into it.
Yes.
He said we couldn't quote anybody or produce any documents. Of course, we had them, but we couldn't produce them. And we had the interviews, 2 interviews, one with Dr. Gluckman, one with Dr. Hirsch. And we knew it all, and we had it all, but we couldn't reveal our sources. So that was what
You
happened.
left it there. And as you say, eventually the truth came out.
Truth came out. We were trying to prevent a cover-up. That's what we were trying to do, primarily, yeah.
Did you feel in that moment what you had done was important work? Was there reaction that was positive, despite the fact that there was so much negative
Yes,
reaction?
there was reaction that was positive, but it mainly came from overseas or the small anti-apartheid group that surrounded the Rand Daily Mail. Obviously, a large number of South Africans were very supportive of what we were doing. No question about that. They were very supportive. But from the government, it was nothing but heavy-handed resistance.
Jeez, interesting times. You stay at the. Did you move around different publications? So you stuck around.
No, I'm a loyal type.
Yeah.
I've stuck to one publication and I stuck to one party.
Well, then it was a different party. What was it? How did you join?
Progressive Party.
Yes. How did you join? And what year was this?
I think 1967 or 1968, somewhere around there.
But clearly as a junior.
Yeah, as a young pro, as they call them, the young progs.
Yeah.
And there were very few of us.
What was your role?
I was the National Youth Secretary. It sounds very grand, but there were about 6 or 7 of us.
Oh, hell.
Bobby Gottsel was the national chair at the time.
Yeah. But was it a relatively big party? Because you then were dealing with dealing with the national party.
We had 1 seat in Parliament. 1 seat. It was Helen Suzman's seat. That's all.
One insignificant seat.
We've built from there. Yeah.
Geez, well, it's a different world now, and it changes with time. And your role obviously progresses with time as well. What is your next role in the party as it grows?
Well, my next role was to become a journalist, and then I could not be a member of a political party. That was the rule. And then I left journalism when the Rand Daily Mail fired Alistair Sparks and clamped down on her. Anyway, very sad period in my life, but that's what happened. And I went back to university for a bit. And I did a lot of freelancing for overseas publications.
Okay.
And then I got very involved in the Black Sash and did various other things. I started my own business, a public policy consultancy.
Okay.
I went to UCT as the Director of Communications at the University of Cape Town back then.
And politics is not calling you. It's not loud enough at this stage.
I was always interested in politics and always peripherally involved. But I'll tell you when politics started really calling me. I had got married in the meantime, and I had 2 sons. And my sons went to a place called the Grove Primary School, which was a little school. And the government, and I was very involved on the governing body. I was chair of the governing body, in fact. And it was in the first years of democracy. I was very involved then. I was at CADESA and other places like that. And then the government started working on a new Schools Act. And I was very involved in that as a chair of a governing body. So in commenting publicly and in sending in public comments, not in writing the actual bill.
Okay.
And it was Professor Hunter, Peter Hunter, took us very seriously and incorporated a lot of our comments in the bill, in the final bill, which we were very pleased about. A good bill, the South African Schools Act, it became a good act. And the first thing that ANC government did after 1994 was change its own law and drive the voluntary severance package and redeployment scheme, which I won't get into. It's a complex thing, but it was really designed to destroy the functional schools in public education. And we decided then we've got to fight this. And we mobilized 80 schools around the Grove Primary School, took the case to court and won the case.
Jeez.
And then the ANC, just like the National Party before it, decided that it was going to change the law to get its own way.
This is post-94.
1996, this was.
All right. Very early on.
Yeah, very early on. And then they started changing the law. And I used to go to Parliament to watch these debates, and I was appalled. You know, as a journalist, I'd watched many of the debates in Parliament under the National Party. And I saw no difference. The ANC was just going to bulldoze this thing through. They weren't going to listen to anybody. I was furious with my former colleagues in the Black Sash for just going along with anything that the ANC wanted. I was furious with them.
Yeah.
And I took on this fight. We won in court against the minister at the time. I think it was Minister Bengu, if I'm not mistaken.
Remember.
And then we ensured that we stopped the act. And after that, I decided I've got to go into this arena. I've got to be in politics.
It motivated you that
Yeah,
much?
it motivated me that much. And then Tony Leon, because I've been writing a lot in the newspaper about education policy, about why this bill was going to be a disaster. Tony Leon contacted me and said, would I look at the education policy of what was then the DP? And I said, sure, I'll look at it. And I rewrote it and it was adopted. And he said, would I put my hat in the ring for a position on the DP's list in the Western Cape?
Okay.
So I competed for it. It's never handed out in our party. You have to go and compete.
Yeah.
I competed for it and I got a place, number 5 on the list.
Jeez,
And,
quite high up.
Well, it was very low for the DP at that stage because we didn't think we were going to get 5 places in the Western Cape.
Well, yes, because it's very, very early,
Yeah.
early or late 90s.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Well, that was 1999.
Yeah.
And then I got elected by 135 votes on a remainder. So don't tell me a vote doesn't count. I just got elected. And then they made me the MEC for education.
I remember that
Yeah,
time.
so it was a very, very, one day I was sitting as a mommy on a school governing body. 6 months later, I was the MEC for education.
Imagine that. That's quite. Did you find the job? And I like how you even introduced that idea, because now you're a mommy. Next day, you are handling the entire education of the entire province. Was that an overwhelming job for you at the time?
It was a fascinating job for me.
Yeah.
I immediately saw every one of the million kids at school in the Western Cape as my own kids. And I just wanted to have the very best for them that I could. And to fight for that and wake up for that every morning gave me such a purpose.
Yeah.
It was a fascinating job.
Incredible. Something that's said a lot about Cape Town, and I like how you've been part of its politics for so long now. It's its level of obvious inequality that people see when they land at the airport and they drive out of the airport. What is your immediate reaction to, one, that comment and the reality of the dynamics that the city of Cape Town or the Western Cape represent?
Well, it's the dynamics of the whole of South Africa. But except that people living in Cape Town have the services mostly that the government is supposed to give them. Many, many people who live in shacks around the airport and other shacks have come in from conditions of absolute poverty in rural areas where they often do have a house, but they need a job and they need an income. And that is why they come to the cities. They're prepared to move away from an established house, often, not always, to come to the city to earn a living. And it's inevitable that no government with a scale of urbanization that we have can keep ahead of the curve. And people come to Cape Town and to other major cities primarily because there are jobs. And there are only jobs there because there are people with capital and skills who invest and start businesses and offer job opportunities. And the role of the government in that context is not to build a 3-bedroom house with a garage and a car in it for every person. The role of the government is to deliver what it's supposed to do in the Constitution, which is basic services. So, do people have clean water to drink? If Eskom is generating electricity, do people get electricity in their houses? Do they have refuse removal? Do they have sanitation? Do they have schools? Do they have clinics? Do they have roads? Is there public transport? If you say yes to all of those things, then the government is doing what the government should be doing. If people go and erect a shack on an unserviced piece of land, then we have to retrofit that piece of land. And many people think that Camps Bay looks like Camps Bay because the government has delivered Camps Bay. No, the government has not delivered Camps Bay. The people in Camps Bay have built those houses privately. And they've done it through a growing economy which can produce prosperity. And it's those people who run the businesses that create jobs for other people in a process of upliftment. And so many of those people in Camps Bay pay up to 35,000 Rand a month to live in their own homes. They pay that in rates and taxes to the local authority so that we can give free basic services to the poor. I once got into huge trouble when I said, if you're a poor person in South Africa, it's much better to be in Langa than in any other township across South Africa.
I remember that.
Now, what is so terrible about saying that? It just happens to be the truth. I live over the road from Langa in Pinelands. That's where I live. I can see the blue roof of the school where my husband teaches mathematics on a Thursday morning in Langa. Langa has all the facilities that the government is supposed to deliver for people. All the facilities.
Then what do you say to those that say it has become more expensive to live in Cape Town, even for people who are originally from Cape Town?
Of course it's become more expensive to live in Cape Town. It's because it's supply and demand. Everybody wants to be in Cape Town because a government that runs properly in South Africa attracts people. It attracts investment. It attracts capital. It attracts skills. It attracts job seekers. It attracts people. And then the law of supply and demand hits in.
But shouldn't the law of supply and demand in this context also be conscious of human needs? You can't, if the most expensive house in South Africa is probably found in Cape Town,
yes,
and the cheapest house is probably found in Cape Town, 2 kilometers away.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
The poorest house is definitely not found in Cape Town. I can promise you that. I can take you to a couple of places where there aren't any rich houses. But the reason that the poorest house in Cape Town can get free basic services and very generous free basic services is because the richest house in Cape Town is paying probably 50,000 Rand a month in rates to the municipality to cross-subsidize and support the poor. It's another reason why poor like to come to Cape Town is that there's such high cross-subsidies. And in the latest Auditor General's report, the Auditor General himself warns the city of Cape Town, your subsidies are so generous for the poor that they might not be sustainable in the long run. So it's the rich that enable that cross-subsidization to happen.
How do you then manage it? You know, in a chat I had with Premier of Gauteng, Bayanza Lesufo, and I said, people are coming to Gauteng. They're coming in droves. Will you be able to manage this in the long run? He said, let them come. It's free. Gauteng is open for everyone. How do you then manage the influx that's coming into the city of Cape Town? That is, as you say everyone wants to come in, but how do you, as a city, eventually manage it?
Yes, that's the big challenge. And of course, I've been saying since 2006, when I became the mayor of Cape Town, we've got to have infrastructure-led economic growth. Infrastructure-led economic growth. The role of the state is to provide the infrastructure and, crucially, to maintain the infrastructure. We've learned from the Eskom debacle what happens when you don't maintain the infrastructure. That's why we have load shedding. And in Cape Town, we've always budgeted for maintenance, very much so. And we budget for new capital investment in infrastructure, especially sewerage, water. All of these things aren't sexy. You can't see them. Nobody thinks, well, the government is investing in me, but they can flush their toilet.
And it leaves the house.
And it leaves the house.
Yes.
And I can promise you that is a huge investment done at scale. Refuse removal is a huge investment. Wait for those things to break down, as they have in some parts of South Africa, and you'll see what failed investment in infrastructure looks like.
Being a mayor of a city such as Cape Town with so interesting dynamics, what were some of your most basic challenges to get your message across or to get your work done?
The things people inflict on themselves and then blame the state for is a major difficulty. The extent of drug abuse in Cape Town is totally horrific. Now, you know, we push the police all the time. We know that in some cases the police are corrupt and facilitate the drug lords. We have been trying to push back on this as hard as we can. But if you start taking drugs, you are likely to become addicted. And if you become addicted, nothing the government or anybody else does for you will get you out of poverty.
Yeah.
That has to be a personal choice. Now, often it's very difficult for people when they grow up in homes where the parents are drug addicted or alcoholics or whatever to escape that cycle. But if we cannot break the grip of Niobe, as you call it up here, of tik, of unga, of all of those kinds of things that we've got in Cape Town, we're going to sit with an underclass that can't be rescued by any intervention, with this extreme level of addiction, which we have. That is one massive issue. The other thing is teenage pregnancy. Yeah. Teenage pregnancy traps people in poverty. I'm not saying here from a moralistic standpoint. I'm saying just for a simple standpoint of beating poverty. We have regularly girls of literally as young as 10 getting pregnant. 10, 11, 12. 14 is routine. 16 is absolutely routine. Girls must finish their education before they fall pregnant. In fact, not only must they finish their education, they must find a man who is going to take being a father very seriously before they have a baby.
Yeah.
Because truly, raising a child as a teenager will trap you and the child in poverty and probably drug addiction for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And prostitution or whatever it takes, because you've got no skills, you've got no capacity to earn a living. Drug addiction and teenage pregnancies are an absolute evil that no government on its own can deal with. It's got to be a societal culture that deals with that. Yeah, those were some of the huge issues we faced.
Cape Town is known world over for gangsters and the fights and open shootings that happen. How over time has and I asked this since you were once MEC in the same area, mayor and premier. You know the dynamics probably better than a lot of people because you saw them from a leadership point of view. How were you able to deal with it then? And what intervention have you noticed now that are implemented?
Well, one thing I did when I was the mayor was I started the Matrix clinics. Now, the Matrix model is a model from the United States, which deals specifically with methamphetamine, which is tik. We call it tik. A terrible, ghastly, cheap drug, highly addictive, that you can make in your own kitchen. And of course, lots of people get onto that.
Yeah.
And these are outpatient clinics which have a high level of success. So I wanted everybody who wanted to move away from drug addiction to be able to do so if they made up their mind that this is the difficult path they're going to take to walk away from addiction. I wanted to give everyone who had that much inner core an opportunity to do so.
Did it work?
Those clinics were a success, and it also spurred the universities to start focusing on specializing in addiction and addiction treatment, because we've got terrible levels of addiction in Cape Town, terrible. And most of the gang wars are over drugs and drug turf and drug territory.
Yeah.
And so until we get rid of that and the evil, evil people who prey on these helpless addicts, we're never going to turn it around. So, I wanted to find ways of getting people into affordable, sustainable addiction treatment.
You have spoken highly about managing crime in the city of Cape Town or in the Western Cape. What were some of the achievements?
Well, the Metro Police had been started, I think, back then by Ian Nielsen, who was the MACO member for finance. And we have built the Metro Police under J.P. Smith into a formidable force. And they now even have an investigative capacity. So they do an incredible amount of work to support the South African Police Service in their work. And it's made a very big difference. And the LEAP officers, where we've been able to deploy them, have made a big, big difference, especially to violent crime. So that's happened over the years. But you see, it doesn't happen instantly. Cape Town has been under DA government for more than 15 years now, nearly 20 years. In 2026, it'll be 20 years. And that makes a difference over time. It's the incremental steps that we take. So in one term, you can do so much. You can't do all that much. You can stabilize the finances. You can get the right people appointed into the right positions. That's about all you can do in your first term. In your second term, you build on that. In your third term, you build on that. In your fourth term, you build on that. And incrementally, Over 20 years, you see a massive difference from DA government. But you've got to start somewhere.
I don't know if this statistics is correct, and I will not mention the numbers, but the city of Cape Town is regarded as the rape capital of South Africa. I don't know if that's true, but there are more unsolved rape cases apparently in Cape Town than any other part of the country.
With rape, you've got to start with a reporting issue. It's a massively underreported crime. And so you mustn't penalize parts of the country that are better at getting the statistics and getting it reported. You know, getting the statistics and getting rape to be reported is a big step in and of itself. So often those statistics can be very misleading. We want people to report. We want accurate statistics, even if it looks as if we've got many more of those cases, which we may not have.
Yeah.
I mean, this notion that men can have their way with women wherever they feel like it has to stop in South Africa. It just has to stop. No means no. Very simple.
I want to move to you being premier of the Western Cape. There are some who say national government, local government, is this tier necessary? What is your perspective?
Yes, this tier is very necessary. In South Africa, the provincial tier primarily manages education and health. And those really, really matter. They're also very responsible for overseeing local government and the functionality of local government and supporting local government when things start going dramatically wrong. It is also the sphere of government that does a lot with disaster management across various spheres, with environment, with culture and sport, with economic development, with land development. So we were able to pioneer many, many things like the Better Living model, which is a fantastic model of a public-private partnership to build affordable housing for people, and various things like that. We've done enormous amounts from the provincial level.
So you feel it should carry on?
Not only carry on, there should be much more devolution to provinces.
Yeah.
Policing should be devolved to provinces. Electricity generation should be devolved to provinces. The running of rail services should be devolved to provinces.
That reduces national power.
Well, it doesn't. It basically decentralizes power so that people who don't vote for a particular party can be governed by the party they vote for. So, for example, the Western Cape hasn't voted ANC almost since the beginning. And we took the ANC out of power in 2006 in Cape Town and in 2009 in the province. And we would do a much, much better job than the national government at running all the things I've just mentioned. So, I think what we need to do is decentralize to provinces where the provinces can manage it. And it's not unconstitutional. In fact, that very provision is in our constitution as we sit here today. So we can do it. But the ANC doesn't want to because they don't want to be shown up, and they want to maintain control primarily so they can maintain control of the tenders, the contracts, the appointments, because that's what makes them rich.
There's some who won't agree with you at all when you speak of a DA government runs better. And people who live in the city of Tshwane would say, we have a very different experience of this. And people who live in other areas where you run government. What do you say to that?
Well, in Tshwane, what I do say to them is we inherited that government when it was already totally broken. And to turn it around, Tshwane is completely and utterly bankrupt. The ANC put it under administration and in 2 years left us with billions of rands of a deficit. So if you start with ANC cadres throughout the whole administration undermining you, if you start with billions of rands in debt, if you start with broken infrastructure where nothing has been maintained properly since 1996, the first local government election, it's going to take a long time to see the DA difference. Now, let me give you one example. When I came into Cape Town as the mayor, lots of people weren't paying their bills. And so we started cutting them off, especially the more wealthy people. Those we started cutting off immediately. And when we cut them off, they were cut off. In Tshwane, Celia Brink manages to get people, big shopping centers and other people, to be cut off. But what happens? They just pay a bribe to an official to get reconnected.
Oh.
So you cannot even up your revenue stream from people who owe you billions or millions and can pay because you've got corrupt people in your administration prepared to take 1,000 rand to reconnect somebody illegally.
But those people are not necessarily politically affiliated. They're probably just administrators.
Well, let me tell you, when we came into Cape Town, we didn't have those kinds of problems. We didn't inherit a corrupt administration. Oh. Why is every administration run by the ANC so corrupt? Why? That trickles down from the top. A fish rots from the head.
I hear
Everybody becomes corrupt in that context.
I hear that, but allow me to defend them slightly.
Let me hear, David.
Yeah, it's not always easy, but I'll do my best. Because you're dealing with people who are, you don't know which political party they belong to. They just work for a municipality. They leave their house. They could easily be voting for DA for that matter. We don't know. They leave their house. They go and work there, wherever they do work, whether it's at the borders that are porous or whatever it is. And somebody comes through. They say, I'll give you 200 rands, just let me in. Or come through, I'll give you 200 rands, just connect my power. That person connects it. They make that 200 rands. I think sometimes corruption is not always politically affiliated, but it's an economic challenge that most people are facing.
I agree with you that it's not politically affiliated. That I agree with you 100%. But the ANC's created an environment where it's acceptable to be corrupt. And that is the problem. If you went to a place, let's say, and I dare not mention this word, but Singapore, they have such an anti-corruption culture there. It is intense. And corruption is seen as almost like incest. I mean, it's just a terrible thing to be corrupt there,
It's
and so you don't.
Evil.
You don't do those kinds of things, right? And so that's the culture. But if you live in this Kim Kardashian culture where you see on social media women with hairstyles and long nails drinking pretty drinks and never doing any work and getting out of Lamborghinis and doing all that kind of thing, you think, well, that's the lifestyle I aspire to. And they're all getting it because they're getting in on this tender and this contract and this kickback and this Gupta-style Saxon Wall shebeen. Where's my slice of that? It becomes a culture. And we need to have a culture of modesty. That's why I don't like government cars being big things and driving around here and there. I want, Priuses. I want small, modest cars. I want a culture from the top that people aspire to be modest and not flash anything that you've got around. And that'll help to change the culture.
However, prosperity is not a bad thing.
Prosperity isn't a bad thing when it's earned.
We can't assume all prosperity that people have who are getting government tenders didn't earn it.
Well, let me tell you this. Any country in the world where your wealthy class is drawn from government bureaucrats, you can be sure there's something very, very wrong. I don't mind if people get wealthy because they have a brilliant idea, because they borrow money and take a huge risk to develop that idea. That idea catches on. People like the product. They buy the product and they get rich because they've taken a massive risk on a great idea and put it out there, and people have bought into that idea. People are allowed to get rich like that. Absolutely, because they took a risk and they add value to society, because no one would want that if it wasn't adding value to their lives, right?
True.
So that's fine.
Yeah.
If people get wealthy through enterprise, no problem. But if people get wealthy through fleecing tax money, big problem.
Yeah. Is that where we are?
Of course we are. I mean, governments don't have money. They don't have any money. They only have the money that you and I pay in taxes. And when people are getting wealthy off tax dollars because they have an inside track to get a tender in a contract as the middleman because of their political affiliation or the color of their skin, that's where you have the downward spiral.
How do we fix that? Some have said the tender process should stop, but it's historic.
Well, I wanted to introduce blockchain for the tender.
How does that work?
Well, blockchain is open ledger accounting, basically. Okay. And it's where you can see every transaction absolutely openly, and you know who's buying and who's tendering what, who's getting it, etc. And you follow the entire chain.
You're saying the people see that?
Everybody sees that.
Yeah.
You see, what you need is exposure, and then you stop the corruption. Or that's a big part of it. I used to think that the more people were involved in something, the less likelihood there would be to have corruption. But in our benighted country, you can get 20 people who all agree together to be corrupt and split the proceedings. Normally, at least 18 of the 20 people will say, no, we can't do this. Not in South Africa.
Even 2 of the 20 is enough to say maybe it may not happen.
Yeah.
Have you dealt with corruption in the DA?
Yes, corruption, human beings will be corrupt if there is enough of an incentive to do so. You'll get 10% of human beings who will never be corrupt under any circumstances. You will get 10% who will always be corrupt. And the middle 80% can go either way. Now, you've got to create a context where there is a culture of big anti-corruption and you have enough oversight mechanisms without getting as bureaucratic and as full of red tape as the South African system is to put proper checks and balances. But transparency is the biggest thing. And I really wanted to introduce blockchain for tenders before I left as Premier in the Western Cape. But it was too new a technology and I didn't have enough time.
How did you deal with corruption in the DA?
Well, where we find it, we deal with it incredibly strictly. We've just had a person who's been with the party probably for 30 years more, and who's generally done a good job. But we found that he had started a bank account into which donor money was going and he couldn't account for it all. Boom, gone.
And this is party money. It's not even in government.
Yeah, that's party money. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jeez. Clearly not a difficult decision to make.
No. Out, gone.
Yeah.
But we have fair processes in the DA. We don't, jump to conclusions. You have to have a proper investigation. You have to be found guilty with the evidence. This is not a witch hunt. And if you're found guilty, then the DA doesn't tolerate it. We do not tolerate it.
Something that has come up, and I feel it'll take us back to earlier conversations about your Jewish lineage. It's the story that we've been hearing a lot.
Well, I've got Protestant and Jewish lineage.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. We've been dealing with the war in Gaza. That's been horrible. Everybody knows that. What is DA stance in that regard? Because it seems like there is some resistance. And allow me, actually, you know what? Let me let you answer the question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, our stance is very clear. We believe in a two-state solution.
Okay.
We believe in a secure Palestine, a secure Israel, living side by side within secure borders and supporting each other. That's what we believe in. We believe it is attainable. We are very committed to that because we believe that's the only solution. We oppose any idea that either side can be wiped off the map and wiped off the face of the earth. And that is what we do our very best to support.
But there's some who say the land that the people of Israel are on is Palestinian land.
There's others that say that land was originally Judah, which was the land of the Jews. People say different things. This issue is so polarized. It goes back 2,000 years. It goes back to Abraham, the father of all 3 major religions that we are aware of, that we are used to in South Africa. He had 2 sons. Ishmael was the eldest son. Isaac was the younger son. Isaac became the father of the Jewish tribes, and Ishmael, the father of the Muslims. They fell out. 2 brothers, 2 close brothers. And of course, Christianity came out of the Jewish faith because Jesus Christ was a Jew. So these faiths are all traced to the same one man, Abraham. There must be a way of resolving this without fratricide, that is, brothers killing brothers.
Because the brothers killing brothers resulted in over 20,000 people dying, literally in the last 6 months.
Well, it's still had many, many, many more people dying over many, many more years.
Absolutely.
And it goes back 2,000 years, as I say. And it's highly polarized, and it's not a simplistic answer that either of the extreme sides give. The resolution is in the rational center of realizing the reality now and saying that the reality is a 2-state solution with secure borders, recognizing each other's right to exist.
very recently, South Africa took part in The Hague in saying this is genocide, or it should at least be considered as one. What is your take as you personally and obviously as the DA?
As the DA, we said we recognize the International Court of Justice as a legitimate body internationally, and we abide by the decision of the court.
And personally, you obviously same position, I imagine.
Personally, I'm also a person who abides by the rule of law, yes.
Yeah. Because what do you consider what's happening genocide?
Look, you know, that's a loaded term. And it's meant to be a loaded term. I know what genocide is very personally because half my family's been wiped out in one of the biggest genocides of history.
Yeah.
You could argue that Hamas's entire constitution aims at wiping out the Jews and wiping out Israel, so that's their aim. And you can argue on the other side, as people do. That is why the DA says we're not on an extremist organization. We don't want to argue with the extremes. Our job in South Africa is to bring together the rational center, who recognizes some harsh realities and is prepared to work with those realities. That's what we're trying to do in South Africa. That is why people who want to be populists and extremists don't fit well with the DA. We say we have to have the rational center of moderate South Africans who want to build a common society together. That's our aim. And whatever we say about the Middle East isn't going to change the situation there. Whatever we say, we can take any position we like across the whole spectrum. It's not going to change the position in the Middle East. What our job is, as the DA, is to save South Africa, is to rescue South Africa. That's our job. And we are doing it every day. We want a common society where everybody can live in peace and harmony and growing prosperity for all. Our job is to get that right. And the best thing we can actually do for the Middle East is to get that right and be a beacon to the nations.
While we're here solving South African problems, one of the most difficult ones we seem to be having is coalition government, because it leads to extreme level of instability and service delivery gets affected by it. You've been caught up in all sorts of tricky coalition setups, Johannesburg being one of them. I think Nelson Mandela Bay being another one of those. What is your opinion about coalition government as an approach to running government in South Africa?
Well, coalition governments are going to be the way that governments are run in South Africa. We can't get away from it because proportional representation systems lead to coalition governments all over the world. Our big problem is that we don't have any thresholds. And so the tiny little parties who get less than 1% of the vote can end up being mayor of Johannesburg. Now, that's crazy.
Like what we have now.
Yeah. And that's completely undemocratic. That's got nothing to do with democracy. And so the bottom line is that is why most countries with workable coalitions ensure that they have thresholds that if you can't even get 5% of the vote in a society, you don't then get seats in the particular legislature that the election was held for.
Are there countries that are running that successfully?
Of course, Germany, number one, very successfully. I mean, if you don't get 5% in Germany, you don't get any seats. Denmark has 2%. In fact, every country that has a workable coalition system has thresholds that you have to meet.
Describe it if we had 5%, for example, in Gauteng or in the country, because we're heading towards elections now. What is the likelihood? What type of turnout are we likely to experience in government or in parliament?
Well, let me just take Nelson Mandela Bay as an example. We needed to have an 11-party coalition there, which is completely unworkable. No one is going to make an 11-party coalition work, not on this planet. And that is because people broke down the vote into smaller and smaller and smaller entities. Somebody from the Northern Alliance, now he calls himself the National Alliance, Gary van Niekerk is the mayor. He jets off to China first class, spends 400,000 rand, however many millions he also spent on this. He didn't even get, I don't think, 2% of the vote in Nelson Mandela Bay. But he's now governing, spending money as if he's the king. Nebuchadnezzar, whichever king you want to be, I mean, he's spending money hand over fist, right?
Yeah.
Now, if we had thresholds, just 2%,
Okay.
we would have probably a 4-party coalition in Nelson Mandela Bay, not an 11-party coalition.
And you're saying that's
and
easier.
you can work with that.
Yeah.
You can do something with that.
We are heading towards an election that is likely to be similar to 11 parties, if not more, because now we're dealing with many, many, many more political parties that are coming into the fore. Your Rise Mzansi have never been on the ballot paper, now they are, and many others. It's going to get worse, if anything. How then do we overcome this from your perspective, this unworkable scenario that you've just described?
Well, we have submitted bills to Parliament. Siviwe Gwagube, who is our chief whip, has submitted bills to Parliament to fix it. And one will introduce a threshold, a low threshold. We're only asking for 1%. I mean, please.
Yeah.
That's a very low threshold. I think it's too low. I think it should be 2%. But we're asking for a very low threshold, but that at least may make coalitions more governable.
A 2% threshold in practice means parties who have less than 2% do not get a seat. So a vote that I voted as a citizen of South Africa gets wasted, some might say.
But can you imagine how many votes are wasted if somebody who got 1% of the vote becomes the executive mayor with all of those powers, and then the 99% of the rest of voters' votes were wasted because that executive mayor has almost all the executive power in his hands.
In your take, what makes it possible for a 1% mayor to become mayor?
Well, you've seen it in Johannesburg.
Yes, we have. But what
To
is the reason for it in your observation?
Well, the reason is very simple. To govern, you need over 50% of the council. And the big party may bring you to 38%. And then you have to add all the tiny, tiny little parties. And if you're lucky, you'll get 50.5%, 50% plus one person, right? And that one person may say, if you want me, you've got to make me the mayor. And they say that to both sides. And the DA says, no, thank you. We don't want a 1% party to be the mayor because that's not what people voted for. And that's not democratic. And the ANC says, sure, be the mayor.
Why do you think ANC is doing that?
Because the ANC doesn't want to leave power. They think they can control these mayors, these one-party mayors, and they do.
Are we likely to have a similar situation in national government that's coming now?
The critical thing for people to realize is that we need to consolidate the votes. The DA is the party of the rational center, the non-racial rational center. And if we want South Africa to work, and I have studied this so carefully, if we want South Africa to work, we have to follow policies of equal rights, of non-racialism, of the rule of law, of a social market economy that can grow this economy and attract capital and skills. That is what we need. And we want South Africa to work. We need to consolidate the vote around a party that has the capacity and the government experience to make it work.
There's some who say it's not only the DA that can bring that to the table. There are other parties who can do exactly that.
Who?
Action SA, Mzansi, and the ANC.
Where?
There's some who make a solid argument
Where?
to say there are some people that can actually do that within
Making an argument and actually doing it are two fundamentally different things. Never ever believe.
EFF?
If EFF comes into power,
Yeah.
South Africa's rand will crash through the floor.
What will cause that?
What will cause that is that the economy will completely lose confidence in the future. When investors say there's no future in South Africa, they pull out all their money. The rand crashes. No one wants the rand anymore. No demand on the rand anymore.
But how could you say that with such confidence, and yet you don't know? You don't know the type of president Julius and Floyd would be.
I can tell you. Perhaps what we need is Julius and Floyd and whatever to become part of government in a province, one province, to see what happens to that poor province. Just one.
I'm still curious to know why you would say a statement like that with such confidence.
Well, I do, because I know what kind of systems in a democracy lead to prosperity. We don't have to reinvent the wheel in South Africa. We don't have to start experiments. We know from history. We know from all over the world what works for the poor and what doesn't in a democracy. Of course, you can have economic growth in an authoritarian state like China, but we've chosen a democracy. And if you want to have a democracy, the only way you can grow the economy and get jobs is through a market system. The very first thing that Julius will do, and this is what he believes in, the leader must control the party. The party must control the state. The state must control the economy and society. That recipe, and everybody knows that from all the history that we've been through in the last 3 centuries in the world, will completely collapse the economy and turn us into a totalitarian state. We know that. That's why I'm confident to say that.
China is different when you said it.
China is an authoritarian state. There's no democracy there. We've chosen democracy. So if you choose democracy first, then you can only make it work with a market economy. You cannot have the party controlling the state and the state controlling society. So that's why I say that with complete confidence, because I learn from history. So never, ever judge a political party by what they say. Judge them by what they do. And the DA is the only party in South Africa, the only one, that has a successful track record in governance.
We have Tintswalo. You know that lady, right?
I know Tintswalo.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've seen that her life has gotten better.
Well, we would argue that for many, many Tintswalos,
I'm sure of
life
that.
has not gotten better. But
Yeah.
we are not saying for a moment that we want to go back to a state where Tintswalo didn't have rights.
Or didn't have water.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, most Tintswalos now don't have water. Even in Johannesburg, where we're sitting right now, you have water shedding regularly, daily. People sometimes go for weeks without water in
We are
Johannesburg.
fixing things.
Oh, really? I'll believe that when I see it. I've heard that being said for...
We're working on the challenge.
Oh, I'm sure you are. We've had load shedding since 2008.
Yeah.
And we've been working on the challenge ever since, and it's only been getting worse and worse and worse.
And some say 30 years is not a long enough time.
It's certainly been long enough to totally destroy Eskom, which was once the world's best and leading utility for electricity generation.
I grew up in the township. What we see as load shedding was common even then.
Look, let me tell you this. There was no what we call load shedding from Eskom now. If somebody blew up a transformer or something, yes, then you would have a power outage for a while. But it wouldn't be because of the state's incapacity to generate enough electricity. We used to have the world's best electricity utility in Eskom, the best. It took us 30 years to destroy it. Less.
I want to stay with Tintswalo for a second. Tintswalo didn't have water, didn't have running water. Tintswalo school was a made-up school. Nothing was not built with bricks and cement. Tintswalo's life was horrendous. He didn't have easy access to medical care, health care system, and so forth and so forth. I can talk about a lot of things that Tintswalo didn't have, and Tintswalo has all those things now. I think Tintswalo's life has gotten better. But you're saying, well, there's no government right now, the very ANC government that tells it very clearly that they've made Tintswalo's life better. And you're saying, but they didn't do a good enough job. Why are you criticizing them if Tintswalo's life has gotten better?
We could have done a whole lot better. A whole lot better.
So this is a measurement of performance.
Of course it is a measurement of performance.
However, there is performance. That's good performance.
Let me say this, that it is a huge step in the right direction that Tintswalo is not discriminated against because of the color of her skin. That Tintswalo has the freedom that she never had before. That is a huge step in the right direction. And whatever other argument people make, no one is arguing about that. Nobody is arguing about that. In fact, my party has always worked for that, always striven for that. There's no way we have ever supported apartheid. The ANC swallowed the National Party. The ANC took Martinus van Schalkwyk and the National Party on board, not us. We kicked them out. So the bottom line is this. Our party has always opposed apartheid. And our party wants a society in which Tintswalo can use her freedom to live a life that she really values. That's what our philosophy does. So where the DA governs, Tintswalos have much more opportunities. We can't save Tintswalo necessarily from choices of drug addiction or teenage pregnancy. We can't save her from that because we believe in human agency. And I know how Tintswalo often doesn't have control over her own sexual life because of patriarchy and the oppression of women. And that is a terrible thing about South African society that we still have to change culturally. But the job of the government is to build a ladder for people to climb out of poverty. And that ladder has rungs on it. It has being able to be born safely in a secure environment. It is being able to get all your medical injections when you're a little child so that you don't die of some dreadful disease. It means getting a child grant so that you have the basic necessities. It means getting into a preschool. It means getting into a school. It means moving up. But the people who have to hold the ladder are the child's parents. So the state provides the ladder. The parents have to hold the ladder, and the child has to climb it. And obviously, while the child is climbing it, when people are trying to pull the child off when they get to a teenager, like drug addiction or pregnancy, the parents hold the ladder. The parents keep the child climbing upwards to reach the top. But a state can't put you on the top of the ladder. You have to get up there yourself.
Yeah. Has Ramaphosa done a decent job of running this country?
No. He should have been a bold reformer who did what was necessary. Instead, he was absolutely timid, he's conflict averse, and he put the ANC above the country.
You speak of him in the past.
Yes, he is in the past. Yeah, he is in the past, I'm afraid.
Why so clear that he's in the past? He's likely to win. There are only three possibilities of presidents in our country. It's either going to come from the DA, the EFF, or the ANC. Or, since we have that little problem of threshold, it might come from another small party.
Yeah.
So you speak of him. He's likely to still be president. So what do you say to a Cyril Ramaphosa presidency again in South Africa? And what is it likely to achieve, in your opinion, from what it has done so far?
I don't think it's going to achieve anything. That's the point. I mean, we all came with such high hopes in 2019.
So you also had hopes?
We all had hopes. I thought the best way of supporting Cyril Ramaphosa's potential was to back the DA, because then he would realize that he wouldn't be beholden to the EFF. That he would have a much stronger partner in the DA eventually. But I've given up that idea. I've given up that idea entirely because he's completely failed as a reformer.
You're saying you've given up on it. So the idea of partnering with the ANC has always been there within the DA? No,
it has not. It has definitely not. Okay. That has not been there. But I thought once, and that's me, that if Cyril came out as a bold reformer who did what he knows has to be done, to get economic growth going, to stop corruption, to do all of those things, to get rid of cadre deployment, all of those things. If he was bold and did that, I thought there was potential. I don't think so anymore. Not at all.
So you will never be in a coalition with the ANC?
Well, I don't see them as coalition partners. They'll destroy the DA.
If the conversation ever comes up? Because it's really just a phone call.
Well, no, it's not a phone call. That's the problem. It's not a phone call. And it's not bargaining around positions. Coalitions are very complex things that require very complex agreements.
So you're saying, as a DA, you wouldn't pick up that call?
It's not my call. I'm not the leader of the party.
Well,
my job is to keep the rest of the party running so that the leaders can make the call.
Would you pick up the call?
Well, my personal take is that it might once have been a prospect when Cyril Ramaphosa posed as a great reformer.
Okay. It's 5 years ago.
Yeah. But the interim and the last 5 years have shown me absolutely not. The ANC is endemically corrupt. They're only involved and focused on staying in power to keep their fingers on the purse strings. And they don't have any inherent capacity for reform.
What is the one thing that has disappointed you the most about him as president?
his lack of courage. I know Cyril not well, but I do know him, and I did work in an extended cabinet with him for a while. Let me say that I think he's basically a good man, but the one critical ingredient you have to have in politics is courage. And I don't think he's got that.
And that's a deal breaker.
It's a deal breaker.
Yeah.
It's a deal breaker. I mean, to fix South Africa, you're going to have so much courage. You've got to have a backbone of steel.
And he doesn't have it. Is there anyone within the ANC that has it?
Well, I don't know everybody within the ANC, but anybody in the top positions, absolutely not. I mean,
The top 7 now.
No.
Coalition with the ANC, but rather with EFF. There was cooperation in the city of Tshwane a few years ago.
I was dead opposed to that. Dead opposed to
Really?
that. Very.
However,
I mean, that caused my first polarization with Musi and others.
It gave you Mayor Msimanga. That was that time when Mayor Msimanga became mayor.
I know, but
you say you were dead opposed to it, but
I was dead opposed to a cooperation agreement with the EFF. Dead opposed to it.
Why were you opposed to it?
Because we believe in completely different things. Our job is to oppose the EFF. Ultimately, South Africa is going to come down to a contestation between what the DA believes and what the EFF believes. The ANC doesn't know what it believes. It's all over the place. The EFF knows what it believes, and the DA knows what it believes. The DA believes in constitutionalism, the rule of law, non-racialism, a social market economy, and progress for all. That's what the DA believes in.
Are you saying if I was to put a Cyril Ramaphosa on that chair, he will have different opinions to those beliefs?
I don't care what his opinions are. I want to see what he does.
Yeah.
It's very easy to say things, but can you do things? Can you become the government, let's say, of a city or a province or a country and do the things that are necessary to get progress? That's what's important. And to do those things, you need a lot of courage because there's a million people pulling you down all the time. And people in the media who don't know what they're talking about, gabbling on all the time.
And a possibility, because we're going to have meetings very soon, within the next 3-4 months, where political parties like yourself will be sitting around the table saying, we only need 10 seats in parliament. We only need 7 seats in parliament. We only need 15 seats in parliament. And those conversations will get to a point where you say, maybe we should call Julius. And you're saying that'll never happen.
It'll never happen. Look, I'm not the leader of the party, but it'll certainly never happen under our current approach to things, no.
Yeah. What's likely to happen post-elections in your take? With the moonshot being part of the conversation?
The most important thing is, in this election, I really think, is the provincial contests. They're going to be big, big. I think the moonshot has a path to power in Gauteng.
Okay.
I know that MK has been a game changer in KwaZulu-Natal.
I'm coming to it.
But I think that we had a good shot with our other moonshot partner, the IFP.
Mm-hmm. Are they still your partner?
They're very much our partner.
Okay.
So they're a moonshot partner of ours. And we certainly had a clear path to victory there. The big thing that we need to do in the DA is to aim to emerge as the biggest party in various places, and certainly eventually nationally also. And then that'll be a complete game changer. And then we can really rescue South Africa.
A recent research says EFF will surpass your numbers.
Look, I mean, there are many, many polls running around.
This is a celebrated poll. I say celebrated because in the past, surely you've believed in it. Is it Ipsos? What is it called?
The one poll that we don't believe in is Ipsos.
Okay.
The only poll,
Even when it speaks what you want to hear.
No, it doesn't speak what we want to hear anyway. But it doesn't matter. We only want to hear the truth. That's the point. If the truth is negative, but it's the truth, we want to hear it.
Okay.
I'm a person who tells the truth irrespective. That's what I get into trouble for. I tell it as it is. I tell the truth. I prove to be historically correct, even if I'm not politically correct in my own time. But I tell the truth because I really believe you're building on quicksand if you don't tell the truth.
That's true.
So I believe in telling the truth no matter how much trouble I get into.
Yeah.
But we believe our own polls because we've perfected them over many, many years. We've done turnout modeling that no one else has done. We allocate doubtfuls in a way that no one else knows how to do. So our polls are the most accurate polls. And
what are your polls saying?
Our polls are saying that Jacob Zuma is a big player in KwaZulu-Natal and that he's shaken up things there and taken a lot of votes from the ANC and the EFF in particular.
Mm-hmm. Which affects you indirectly.
It does, indirectly. Obviously, everything affects everybody indirectly or directly. And we're very satisfied with our progress.
And nationally, what are your polls saying?
Well, I'm not going to go into detail of what our polls say because obviously that's
give me
that's
highlights.
Classified information. But what it's saying is that the ANC is plummeting, and they'll be very lucky to get 45% in this election.
It's very little to run in the country.
Well, it's enough to make them very vulnerable.
Yeah.
So who do they run the country with? That's the big question.
Can you predict?
Who knows? I mean, I think if you look at the raw numbers, there's a possibility that they could run the country with the IFP, which I think might be the first choice of Cyril and others. I think that's what you might see.
Definitely not a EFF.
Well, Paul Mashatile would want to go with the EFF. So it depends what the balance of forces are within the ANC, obviously. But, we will be very strong in terms of holding out an alternative to the EFF.
Yeah.
The EFF believes in the one leader controlling the party controlling the state controlling the economy and society. Disaster. The economy will crash out within a year. There'll be nothing. Disaster. Unemployment, when you think it's bad now at 60%, wait till it's 95%. Disaster. We can't go down that road.
Yeah. I say wait till Julius hears this. But it's a story for another time. Because I remember at some point...
Julius agrees with me. He agrees that he stands for the leader controlling the party and the party controlling the state and the state controlling society. He agrees that that's his philosophy. But he doesn't agree on what the result will be. I'm telling him now what the result will be. For free.
Is there a country that has had that similar approach to
things? Yes, Stalinism in Russia killed millions and millions of people.
One can argue that Russia is a relatively successful country.
When were you last there?
Well, not anytime soon, recently.
Swallow wouldn't be able to live the life she does if she was an ordinary girl in Russia, believe me.
Yeah. Let's talk to some of the issues that are pertinent to government, to South Africans, that are historic, like land. What is the view of the DA when it comes to land and the distribution of land that was stolen from those who owned it right in the beginning?
Well, anybody who can demonstrate that land was stolen from them should have a claim. I mean, if all the money that we've spent on the land restitution program of the ANC has simply been spent on market purchases of land that came willingly onto the market, we could have bought a third of all South Africa's land with that money that's been thrown down the drain with those schemes that they've got. So if that money had just been used in a proper way, we could be in a very, very different place today. A very different place today. Look, land is not a source of wealth. It's expensive dirt unless you develop it. And it's very difficult to develop land in a sustainable way so that it creates jobs and creates food or produces food. It's very difficult to do that. And if you just own a piece of land that no one wants to buy, it has no value to you at all. Now, the question we need to ask about land in South Africa is why our most fertile land, that is in very large measure in black hands, produces very little food and almost no jobs. The Ingonyama Trust. Why? Beautiful, fertile land. Why isn't it producing huge amounts of food and large numbers of jobs? Because you can create hundreds of thousands of jobs in agriculture if it's done properly.
However, South African land is not in black hands. Majority of South African land is not in black.
Let's look at the fertile land. Let's just look at the fertile land. The last figure I saw was that 73% of KwaZulu-Natal is in black hands. That is seriously fertile land. Rain, sun, everything you want. Now look at that land and say, is it producing food and jobs? Because that's what you want land for. You want land so people can get jobs and they can eat. That's the value of land to a country and to individuals, jobs and food. Now, why is our most fertile land not producing jobs and food? That is the most fundamental question about land we need to be asking in South Africa. Meanwhile, people want to come and fight about land in the Western Cape, which is not fertile. It takes incredible working to produce food off the Western Cape farms, mostly. Not all, but mostly. We need to be concentrating on, I think it's over 50% in the Eastern Cape that is in black hands, and the 73% in KwaZulu-Natal that is in black hands. Beautiful, perfect, arable land. Why is it not producing food and jobs? That's the question.
But you still can't deny me access to my land, even if I use it to put a tennis court. It's entirely what I choose to do with it.
If you want to use your land for a tennis court, but as a government, when people have private land, they can do what they like with it. But we are looking at feeding people and getting jobs for people. Those are the most important things to do. And so you can't just say, give me land, I want to build a tennis court. Then, you must purchase your land.
Yeah, because that the land issues is something that for some reason has been struggling to shift. It's been what it is forever and ever and ever. You and I know the history of this country very well. We don't question that there is levels of injustice that has happened when it comes to the land issue. And you're saying you have to prove that I've stolen your land for me to be able to give it back to you in that context. But some would say the people who are able to prove it are long dead. They're nowhere near here. But I know that this historically used to be the land that belonged to the Mashabela people, and now it's owned by somebody else.
But that's why we've got the restitution program. And that's been so mismanaged that, we've spent literally hundreds of millions of it. If they just bought the land in the open market, they could have given it back, let alone spending these hundreds of millions in the way that they've been spending it. It's completely mismanaged, the entire process, right? So if you can prove that you were dispossessed of your land, even if it wasn't you or your father or even your grandfather, there should be a proper program, but it's got to be efficiently and properly run. And there are many, many people who are willing sellers of their land at reasonable prices, that all of that land restitution money can be used for. I mean, I saw different models of land restitution around the Deduans area in the Hex River Valley. And in several cases, farmers and their workers have bought up a neighboring farm. The workers got money from the state's fund to give them an equal share in the farm. Fantastic model of land restitution, working really well. Where they've handed it over to the ANC cronies and people like Nosy Peterson and others, absolute devastation. Nothing works. So, you've got to look at Zebedila. Once the most productive and biggest orange producing land in the world, citrus producing land in the world. Have you seen what it looks like now?
Yeah, it covered widely in the newspapers last week.
Now, is that a model of land restitution?
Yeah.
And do we feel better now because someone else owns the land, but there are no jobs there anymore? There's no food production anymore. There's no exports anymore. The question is how...
It starts with land ownership, though. I have to own it first and then learn what to do with it.
Well, you see, the bottom line is 73% of KwaZulu-Natal is in black hands, perfectly arable land. That's why I say exactly what you're saying. Let's start and get that land productive.
It's a tricky one. Your policies on economic development, which is where we are now in this conversation, what are some of the most basic policies within the DA that speak to the development of everyone, especially those that are previously disadvantaged in this country?
Well, we have an economic justice policy, which Gwen and Gwenya was primarily responsible for developing. Very, very good policy. And that looks at our major equity programs in terms of ensuring that we use the Sustainable Development Goals as the yardstick and not race. Now, obviously, that's going to mean that most of the people who are going to benefit from that program are going to be previously disadvantaged people, i.e. black. But it is done in a non-racial way. And when it is done in a non-racial way, it can't be abused by the ANC, who says, I have a crony here who's a multimillionaire and he's going to give me a kickback of X, Y, and Z, so I'll pretend I'm doing BEE and I'll make sure that this cadre gets this tender or this contract. There's been massive abuse of that system, and we want to get rid of that. We want to look at key things like, does the investment produce jobs? Does the land restitution produce jobs and food? Those are all the measures that we want to put on the table to measure whether something is really empowering and really benefiting disadvantaged people.
And in terms of, I'm going to touch on different policies. The one that has to do with the porous borders and foreign nationals in the country and so forth. What is the DA's stance on that?
Well, we believe that borders exist for a reason. And while borders are internationally recognized, they have to be properly policed. And we believe that the corruption and lack of capacity and neglect in investing in our borders has resulted in a system which is completely unsustainable. We cannot be the only country in Africa with a social welfare system that we've got and no borders. It means everybody or from the whole of Africa is going to end up here and then bribe somebody to get the necessary documentation and then get all the benefits of free basic services, of
you name it,
child grants, of pensions, of whatever you want. We can't do that. It's not sustainable. We've got 7 million. Now, this is the most critical statistic in South Africa that I'm putting on this table now. We've got 7 million registered personal taxpayers. We've got almost 20 million grant recipients. You cannot work with that ratio. You cannot work with that ratio of taxpayers to grant recipients. It should be the other way around. There should be 20 million productive personal tax-paying citizens who support with a decent social wage the people who can't look after themselves. But that you only get through a growing economy. You only get that through a growing economy. Governments don't create jobs. They create the conditions for investment that drives economic growth and gets jobs. That's the only way to do it sustainably. And we've got it the other way around. We've got 7 million registered personal taxpayers, many of whom are immigrating. They pay huge rates of taxation. I once told somebody that, pay 45% of my income in tax. She says, what does that mean? I said, I pay it to the government. I'll never pay my money to the government. I said, no.
That's what happens.
That's what happens.
Yeah.
You pay your money to the government.
I'll come back to the porous borders and all of that in a bit, because you've introduced the subject of grants. What is the policy of the DA when it comes to this heavy burden that all South Africans have to carry?
Well, our position is this: we have to grow the economy significantly so that there are more people who can contribute to the fiscal pool.
Would you keep the 350 on?
Well, the 350 is just nothing. I mean, what you want is a proper grant system for people who can't look after themselves. What you want is jobs for everybody. 350 is an insult to people. 350 is not government delivering.
So you would get rid of it?
It's government recognizing their failure to deliver. That's what it is.
So you would get rid of it?
Well, we have a system, our grant system looks at more generous grants, but far more jobs. So that you're widening your tax base so that you've got a much bigger tax base. Let's say 20 million personal taxpayers who then can pay their taxes, and then you've got a much bigger pool for grants to subsidize those who really need it. Most people who get grants and who get the 350 actually want to work. They don't want to live on 350 a month. It's an insult. What we want is all of those people in productive jobs, not EPWP jobs. Those are not real jobs.
Yeah.
We want them in productive jobs, building the country, coming home with pride, with a salary, being able to look after their children and put a plate of food on the table and get a table to put a plate of food on in the first place.
Yeah.
That's what we want. And that's what all our policies are aimed at, to get people into jobs. And when they're into jobs, you've got a much bigger tax pool and you can pay better grants to obviously not as many
To
people,
fewer people.
because the people are in jobs.
Yeah. And one of your mayors, your former mayors, who has since left your party and started his own thing, Mayor Helen Mashaba at the time, was very strong against illegal South Africa. Well, those in South Africa who are not legally in South Africa, foreign nationals. What is your position on that subject as a DA?
We believe in the rule of law. And so if it's a country's law that you have to have met certain criteria to be in the country legally, we believe you have to meet those criteria. But if you're going to set those criteria, then you better have a very efficient Department of Home Affairs. And you had better have a very efficient border patrol that manages that properly. And you better have uncorrupt officials who are not prepared to take bribes to disregard the law and to give people fake documents. And so everything depends. If you want the rule of law, which we do, we are a party of the rule of law, it means that the rule of law has to be everywhere. You can't pretend that you've got a country on the rule of law that's going to make sure that every foreign national is properly documented to be in South Africa, but then turn a blind eye to corruption. It doesn't work that way. So we've got to have a whole country that respects the rule of law. And that is the DA's position. If you're having these criteria for foreign nationals to be in South Africa, it's fine. But you've got to then have a state that can administer them in a reasonable amount of time, that can have turnaround times, and that knows how to apply its own law without corruption.
If you were to be in government tomorrow morning, what would you do with the foreign nationals that are undocumented and illegal in the country?
Well, first of all, we believe that the Zimbabweans who have been allowed to stay here on the Z permit, I think it's called.
There are 120,000 of those. They're not many.
Yeah, they should be regularized. I mean, they've been here for a very, very long time. And they've added huge value to our economy, massive value to our economy. And because they had that Z permit, and you can't just take it away from them. I mean, it's something that we don't support that. We don't believe it should be just taken away from them. We believe that you have to have proper laws, you have to have proper border patrols, and you have to build state capacity without corruption to administer them swiftly and properly. That's what we believe.
You would kick them out?
We're certainly not going to go rounding up people like concentration camps.
That's what I'm trying to understand.
No,
the nuts
not.
and bolts.
No,
Yes.
You've got to fix the system.
Yeah. But fixing the system and dealing with people that are already here are two different things. They're already here, and you know where to find them because they have jobs. And
when people have lived in a country for a certain amount of time, they develop certain rights to be in a country. That happens. It works like that all over the world, and it depends on what the law says. For how long do you have to be in a country legally with the right documentation to get a job, to become a permanent resident or whatever else?
Let's talk about an illegal person who has no papers at all.
Well,
he paid a bribe at the border and has been here for 10 years.
Yeah, well, that's a serious matter, and people have to become legalized. I think what one would do would be to say you've got a certain amount of time to legalize your situation or face the consequences.
But how do I legalize? I'm already illegal. I'm afraid that by going to any official office, immediately I'll be caught out and I will be kicked out of the country.
Yeah.
That's why I'm curious to know what does the DA do with, I don't know, whether it's 5, 6, 7 million foreign nationals that are in South Africa illegally, whether they are white, black, pink, or they are Zimbabweans or Mozambican for that matter, or even Germans.
Yeah, well, you've got to fix the system, and it's going to take time. I don't think there are many Germans here illegally.
Well, I'm just throwing, because so it doesn't sound like we always talk about people from Zimbabwe in this regard.
But we want to make it easier for skilled people to come here.
Yeah.
Now, what I have found, and I mean, I can't generalize, but many of the Zimbabweans I know in South Africa are highly skilled and add a huge amount to the economy. Skilled people add more opportunities for unskilled people than they take away. So we want skilled migration to South Africa. We want people with skills who've got money and skills who've got entrepreneurial leanings, who will start businesses. That's what we want. That's how you grow the economy.
What do we do with the unskilled, which are equally as many?
Look, you can't go around rounding up people and kicking them out. You have to go through a process of identifying who they are, determining their particular individual circumstances, and then following the law to deal with their circumstances. You can't make a generalized statement, we will kick everybody out or we will legalize everybody. You can't.
It's the Trump approach to things.
No, you can't. You can't take those extreme approaches in the real world. If you want to be a populist and a demagogue, you can say those kinds of things. But if you want to deal with real problems in the real world, you have to deal with individual issues. So, I mean, the best thing to do would be to say, let's find out who these people are. Let's find out where they are. Let's find out what value they're adding. Let's find out what the individual circumstances are. Let's find, did they try to legalize their situation? Was it inefficiency from Home Affairs? Was it corruption from Home Affairs? It's a big job. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, it's years of
work. But, it's years that has caused this mess. That's why I say when the DA gets into government, the first term, we try to stabilize the finances and appoint the right people in the right positions who can do the job. Then you say, okay, what's the next step? And the next step. It takes 20 years to build a Cape Town.
You say you get into government, stabilize finances, get the right people in the right positions. You're very critical against the ANC's cater deployment. Even the term is starting to sound funny in my mouth.
It should.
But it's not necessarily a negative.
It's very negative.
It's a policy, though, because everyone who gets into government as a political party would want to get people that are loyal to their policies. Are you saying there is no measure of cadre deployment within the DA at all? You're getting people based purely on merit, and not that they are members of the DA.
Let me say this: that when we appoint people in the DA as
officials in government, yes.
No, not officials in government. In the DA, there's a separation between the party and the state.
I hear you.
Fundamental
100%.
separation. So let's say when we appoint a researcher in the DA, we will appoint that person on merit. And then they might be absolutely outstanding. And then they become recognized for their incredible skill. So let me give you an example of somebody. Let's say Tim Harris. He starts as an economics researcher. He does really well. He contests for a position and becomes an MP and becomes our shadow minister of finance and does really well. We then think, who is the very best person we can get to head up a government entity like Wesgro? And he brings all the skills, all the entrepreneurial ability, all the connections, all the everything on pure skills. We do an open round of interviews. He applies. He emerges as the best candidate. That's not cadre deployment. Cadre deployment involves saying, and this is the critical thing, how are we as the party going to control the state so the state serves the party? Now, you made a critical point there. You said, surely any government coming in would want officials that are loyal to its policy. In a democracy, you have to have a professional civil service. They may have their political views, but they are irrelevant to their job. If you're a public servant in a professional public service, you say, the voters elected this party to be the government. I respect the will of the voters, and therefore I implement the policies of that party. And I do it professionally, and I do it for everybody in a non-aligned way. If I can't, because it goes against my principles, there's one honorable thing to do, and that's to resign. At the very top, the directors general, the parties are allowed to appoint people on contract who will give that direction to the department. So there are appointments that will be affected by the new administration. But further down the line, it's got to be a non-aligned professional public service.
So now, is it then cadre deployment? Because what you've described has a measure of cadre deployment in it.
No. Look, First of all, you've got to understand their different positions. They're politicians, right? Now, we've just put our lists in to
Politicians.
People
Yes.
who want to stand for the DA have to apply. It's a 9-month process. You have to write exams. You have to do tests. You have to write articles. You have to write speeches. You have to give speeches. You have to answer questions.
Are those people in the list? Is that who you're describing?
We had over 1,000 people, 1,200 something, apply to get on our list. We had to move 1,000 out of the process over time on a strictly merit-based system. So those people who are on our list are the people who came top in a merit-based system over 9 months of testing, right? Very, very intensive and difficult process. Those are our politicians. You can't talk cadre deployment when you've got politicians. They've applied to be public representatives for the Democratic Alliance, and now they're through and they're there. Then you've got the party administration that I am now responsible for. That we appoint people as well. We've got different departments: human resources, communication, marketing, fundraising, everything, right? We appoint people there. We advertise positions. People apply. We give them interviews. We put them through tests. We choose the best people. They have a career path in the DA. They do very well. One of our governments may spot them and ask them to apply for a particular job, policy formulation, whatever it is. And because they've got the experience, they can compete and do well on competition, and then often get the jobs on competition. So you must understand what cadre deployment is. Cadre deployment starts with a cadre deployment committee of the ANC saying, these are the people we want in jobs because they're loyal to the ANC.
ANC policies.
Yeah, they're loyal to the ANC's policies, right?
Okay.
We want them in all of the independent institutions of state to control those institutions in the interests of the ANC.
Or the interest of the country.
Well, the ANC can't distinguish between the interests of the country and the interests of the ANC.
Okay.
It's always the interests of the ANC because the ANC believes completely wrongly that the interests of the ANC are the interests of the country. That's not the case at all. So it starts with a deployment committee that looks at the end result in institutions that should be completely independent of the political party. The National Prosecuting Authority is there to make sure that you and I get a fair trial if we go to court. It's not there to protect Jacob Zuma from being charged or the ANC's cadres from having to face court cases. That's why the ANC wants their person there so they can control them. No, it's not supposed to be like that. It's supposed to be a completely independent position. So, cadre deployment is a process, not a result. It's where the ANC sits down and says, these are the people we want in positions. Then they go through the processes. They're a complete sham. They're a complete show. And the result is what the ANC cadre deployment process decided in the first place. The DA does the exact opposite. We say, these are the positions we have to fill on these criteria. We're opening the process. We want competition for these positions. Please come. That doesn't mean to say the DA people can't apply. But if they get them, they were the best person. So we don't start with a DA deployment committee.
I hear you, 100%. And are you saying, even with all the allegations that have come up since this cadre deployment thing came up, that allegations that are saying, well, some previous mayors within the DA are saying, well, we were told who to appoint in that position.
Bongani Baloyi said he was never told who to appoint. That was a specific question asked him. Did they ever tell you who to appoint? No, I was never told who to appoint.
So where does this come from?
It comes from the kind of misunderstanding that you had at the beginning of this interview about what cadre deployment is. Oh, Tim Harris was once an MP for the DA and once an economic researcher.
He must have been placed.
He must have been. No, he applied for a job.
Okay. All right. I'll leave it there. We had a corruption, what is the Zondo Commission? And a lot of people are saying, well, nothing came of it, really, because how many people can we count that have been arrested from that entire thing? Almost zero.
Well, Jacob Zuma.
Well, yes, but not for...
but not for that.
Exactly,
yeah.
yes. Then what
he refused to give evidence before the Zondo Commission.
Exactly.
And then they said, you have to, and then he said no, and then he went to jail for contempt of court.
That's what it is. So that's why I ask, what is your take on the results of the Zondo Commission and the amount of money that was spent on it?
Well, I've got a very controversial take on that. I believe that commissions of inquiry should never be used for criminal investigations. I believe that the minute I see the ANC setting up a commission of inquiry, I know they're trying to get people off the hook. I think Judge Zondo was honorable. I think he did a good job. And I think he was committed to getting to the truth. So this is no reflection on the judge. But when the ANC sets up a commission, you know they've got one thing in mind, a judicial commission with a judge. They want to pretend that they're taking something seriously. They want to pretend that they're doing something about it. They want to pretend that they're getting to the truth so that they can get away without prosecuting anybody. Now, criminal matters should not be in commissions of inquiry. They belong to the police, the prosecution, the judicial system, and the prison system. But by setting up a judicial commission of inquiry, you're taking it right out of that system, and you are putting it into a system that will go nowhere. No prosecutions, nothing.
Even Zondo said, well, a lot was found from the commission, and a lot of that information is now
available to the prosecuting authority.
Exactly.
Here you go, there. But commissions are set up to avoid doing that. Because now most South Africans will think, oh, well, we had the Zondo Commission and there was so much corruption found. Look at what happened. We did actually something about it. No, we actually avoided doing something about it.
Should the DA come into power, will they do something about
Absolutely.
The information that came out of
the very
Zondo
first
Commission?
thing we'll do is strengthen the National Prosecuting Authority and make it completely independent.
There's some who are saying it's strong.
Well, it can't be.
With its current leadership.
It can't be strong. It can't possibly be. They're not prosecuting these high-flying crooks. The Nugent Commission produced all kinds of things. The Zondo Commission produced all kinds of things. A whole range of other... It's there, signed and sealed, wrapped, the evidence, there.
They're still finalizing.
How many years later?
they're still working.
How many years later? No, man.
Oh, hell. Now, the future of the DA, if you were to sum it up, what if you were one of those who predicted the end of the game, what would you predict?
Well, look, you can't predict South Africa. All I know is that when I one day on my deathbed, I just want to know that I did everything I possibly could to make this country succeed. I said my parents were refugees. It's terrible having to run away from your country. It's terrible to start a new life.
Why did they choose South Africa?
Well, there's not many places that you could go to, and my father got a passage to South Africa and came here.
Yeah.
And has been very committed to this country, very, very committed to this country, because he would have died if it hadn't been for South Africa. They would have been killed as well. And so that's how it happened.
Yeah.
And
I took it off ramp there. You were still predicting how this game ends this year, at least in the elections.
So let me just say that I quote Jannie Steytler when I say this. One day South Africa will be governed by the principles enunciated by the DA, because it is the only way it can be governed. We can either take a shortcut to there through the voters making a choice to save this country and to rescue this country.
What is the shortcut?
The shortcut is by voting for the DA. That's the short and peaceful cut.
What is the long cut?
The long cut is by fragmenting the vote, allowing the doomsday coalitions to destroy the economy, and to have to pick everything up from the beginning again. And we don't want to do that. We've got a shortcut open to us. We've got demonstrations in this country, Umgeni, Midvaal, Kocha, Cape Town, Mossel Bay, Swartland, all the places that have been governed by the DA. People can see. They've got the examples there. I know there's huge poverty in Cape Town, but people have government services and opportunities. 8 out of 10 people are employed in Cape Town if they want a job. 8 out of 10 people in the Western Cape, if they want a job, are employed. That is huge. There's a shortcut for South Africa if they want to take it.
And that's the DA.
Of course.
And a moonshot.
A moonshot, yeah.
How was the relationship with Herman Mashaba?
Well,
It had a
he's-
bump at
He
some
said
point.
some very nasty things about me, and so, which he himself knows are not true, frankly. But you can't carry grudges in politics. You've just got to move on.
Yeah. And your relationship with the Patriotic Alliance, they're quite a friendly bunch. They once in a while they show intention of working with the DA.
No, man, gangsters are quite a friendly bunch.
So you say, is there a likelihood of talking to them in the future? They have aspirations of leading the country.
We talk to everybody, but governing with them, no.
Not gonna happen. You've tried though.
We tried, but you see, they don't see coalitions as coalitions. They see it as extortion mechanisms. So the DA is giving us this. Then we go to the ANC and we say, the DA has given us one Mako position. If you give us two, we'll come over to you. The ANC says, we'll give you two. Then they come to us. If you give us three, we'll come over to you.
Oh no.
And so it's extortion. It's got nothing to do with coalitions.
They've done that?
Of course they did.
In the city of
Johannesburg. Yes, of course.
They kind of got away with it. They have a few MECs.
They didn't. We said enough is enough.
It was with you.
With us, they don't. No one plays that game with us.
Yeah.
We draw the line and we say that's it.
So we predict a DA-run government.
Well, if people vote for the future of their children, that is what should happen.
What do you say to so many parties that have just come into the fore in terms of how South Africans will vote now? South Africans are finding it tricky to decide which vote. And while you answer that, think about the youth vote being a challenging vote that everyone seems to be looking for, and they just don't know where to find it.
Surely people have realized by now that 11-party coalitions can't possibly work. Celia, I think, in Pretoria has got a 6-party coalition in Tshwane. It's impossible to govern a place properly like that. Surely people realize the consequence of splitting the vote, number one. Number two, they've got examples around the country where government is working. Put those two things together, and the answer about who to vote for should be very clear.
So you're saying these smaller, Rise Mzansi and many others, you're saying South Africa, this is a further splitting of the vote.
Of course it is.
And it doesn't work in the long run.
And the risers and parties like that don't take votes away from the ANC. That's a myth. They take votes away from the DA.
Explain.
Well, they do. I mean, in Herman Mashaba's case, if you look at the 2021 election, his major support came from DA wards.
Naturally, because had just moved out
That's
of the
right.
DA.
So he didn't take any votes from the ANC. Well, he took some votes from the ANC, but
the majority.
The vast majority from the DA.
And you're saying, who votes for the DA?
It doesn't help. It doesn't help.
Who votes for the DA?
Well, that's a very important question. We're the only party with a completely non-racial voter base. The only party. A third of our voters are black South Africans. When I say black, I mean black African. A third of our voters are brown African, and a third of our voters are white African. So we have a third, completely non-racial, bound together by a commitment to these core values that I speak about. Our values are more important than the color of our skin, because we know this is the only way, in fact, to create a prosperous future for everybody over time.
Do South Africans vote for policies or for people?
No, they vote for identity, which is a tragedy. And that is being reinforced by this mad critical race theory that has swept the world and which is so dangerous to our country that I've actually written a book to say that we cannot survive it in South Africa if it comes here. It is here. But the point that I'm making here is now our big challenge is to say we unite behind a set of values, principles, and policies that are the only ones that have enabled democratic societies to flourish. And the black and the brown and the white people who vote for the DA get that.
The division in the country is not created by us. It was created long before us by a system that deliberately said, you will live there, you will live there, will live there. So people continue to identify themselves that way, isn't it?
The divisions of the country go far further back. I mean, let's go through Mfecane. You know, there it was Zulu versus all the other ethnic groupings in South Africa, and that was not a peaceful state. all over the world, if you've read the book called *Sapiens* by Yuval Noah Harari, all people start in tiny little hunter-gatherer groups, and then they stick together for survival, and they become bigger ethnic groups, and they're fighting with this one for their territory and fighting for that one for their space. That's the evolution of humanity, right? All of us. And then eventually you get to the point where there is a nation state, which then rises above all these warring ethnic groups and tries to create a common state. That's what we've got in South Africa. But we've got 11 different ethnic groups, which in Europe would be 11 different countries, 11 entirely separate countries. We've got to make one country work. We've got completely different cultures, ethnicities, backgrounds. Culture matters, right? People are drawn into groups where people have a similar culture that they feel comfortable with. Yes, that's all right and that's all true. It's called freedom of association. But can we all agree on the rules of the game that will enable everybody to live out who they are and strive for their dreams in the same country because we all recognize the same rules? That is what we're trying to get to. It's hard.
You're saying South Africans vote by identity, but that identity differs. Sometimes political identity is defined on the color of the skin. A person who lives in South Africa today, his division to another skin or another skin color is political and historic. And the history is very recent. And do you fault that person for saying, I only vote black, I don't vote white at all?
Well, I say to them, if you want a future in this country, we have to vote for a set of values and principles.
But we don't.
I know we don't. But that doesn't mean to say that I can't keep on saying that we should.
That's true.
And that's our role, to get that message out. Because you know what? History will show that it is true. And it might not fall on very many fertile ears at this point, but it doesn't mean to say we stop saying it. And it's falling on enough fertile ground to enable the DA to win in more and more places. We're a party of government now. Judge us by our record.
It's going to be an interesting year.
It is, eh?
Yeah. Do you still wake up looking forward to it?
Yes. Oh, yes. I've got grandchildren in South Africa. Both my children are here. My grandchildren are here. I've got everything to live for, and there's everything to play for.
Yeah.
The people I love are here.
For us, it's one of those very interesting movies that we are also a part of.
Of course.
And we cast our vote.
I love this country, and I love the people of this country.
Yeah.
You'll never get to a country that has so much as we have. We mustn't throw it away.
That is so true. How many more years in politics for you? When will you say I'm done now? But you're not particularly young, but you look very young.
Oh, thank you.
You still have the energy of a relatively young person.
Yes.
So how many more years of politics for you?
Well, I'll see. While I'm still enjoying it, while I'm still getting a real kick out of it, while I'm looking forward to every single day at work, I'll keep
and that's
on
where you
trucking.
are now.
Yeah.
Because some may have thought immediately after the premiership of the what you call it of Western Cape, and you were completely out. You were going to retire. Clearly not.
Well, I did retire for a little while, but not long.
Yeah. and what led you back? Boredom?
No. The fact that the party was unraveling, and I had to be part with other people of trying to get it back on track.
Yeah. The loss of the people like Mmusi Maimane was the leader of the DA at some point. What did that mean to you?
Well, he didn't have to go, and he shouldn't have gone. And the whole FedEx asked him not to go. It was a setback, but we've had lots of setbacks in politics, and you get back on track, you focus on your core values, and you get over it.
Is John the right person to be president? And I'm not saying he's going to be president. I'm just saying from your perspective.
Absolutely. The DA has put him up as our presidential candidate, of course.
You realize that there's only 3 possibilities, hopefully. We'll see. Ramaphosa, Julius.
And John.
And John. Or maybe Jacob Zuma.
He's been there, done that.
So it's clear who you're rooting for.
Of course.
Yes, it's pretty clear. But I want to ask a concluding question. What is your prediction in that regard?
Look, my prediction is that...
Here are the 3 names.
3 names?
There they are.
Yeah. If South Africa's going to take the shortcut to prosperity? The answer is obvious.
It's John. Okay. We'll see what happens. It's going to be an interesting one. I enjoyed this conversation thoroughly. I realized that I've run out of time. You have a next meeting.
Thanks,
I
David.
appreciate the time you've given
It's
us.
a pleasure. It's been great. I've also enjoyed it.
Yeah, I was very pleased when I got a yes, and I truly appreciate it.
You have to thank Solly Malatsi for that.
There we go. Just I know to thank. That the list of questions continues. There's so many, but I'm sure we've touched on the important ones. Thank you so much again. I'll do a fist bump. Can you reach? I can.
I can. Cool.
Thank you again.
I didn't do it with my ring, hey? That would have hurt you.
I would have injured my hand.
That's why it's called a knuckle duster. This is my DA bling ring.
Oh, look at that.
Isn't that cool?
It is.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
Thanks a lot.
It's been awesome.
Okay.
It's well, there she is. You know her well. I don't need to introduce her or conclude this one with a name. Thank you so much.
Okay.
King David Studio Podcast.